We'll run for exactly 1 hour today, and then we'll keep the call open just for maybe 15 minutes, just to do a round robin around the room and get some shared thoughts and so on. And then it's Friday night, so I'm probably going to not stay on too long on the call tonight. Then we'll take a couple of weeks break, and then we're back, as I said to Vivienne, with some more interviews leading into about the middle of December. Got some wonderful ones. Lord Jim Knight, who used to be the Education Secretary in the UK. Lord David Putnam, who is very, very interested in education, and for those who remember the film, was the producer of Chariots of Fire. And so 2 lords in that session, so Lord of the Dance, and it'll be great to get their opinions alongside. We've got I mentioned this before, the Chief Assessor of Duolingo, who's going to be joining us as well, Alina von Davier, for those sessions. Welcome to new joiners. I see folks are jumping in now, along with, as customary these days, a few bots. So, Vivienne, let's make the most of our special time with you. Let me set the scene for those who haven't been to an MKAI session before, although I suspect many or most of you have. We don't have these sessions to show that we're right, or Vivienne's right, or any of us is right, but that we have some of the broadest, most open minds of any folks around. It's very much a session for sharing and learning, so do use the chat. There might be some chances to speak up in the session as well, so you can leave your cameras on if you want. Just pop yourself on mute if you've got a noisy background, obviously. We'll keep an eye on that mute so that we don't interrupt the flow if Vivienne's speaking. But do put where you're calling in from, which is always fascinating to see what kind of coverage we have across the world. And your LinkedIn, perhaps, as well, your LinkedIn bio, or URL, so that people can connect. I think Alex has a couple of links for us as well. If you could put those in the chat now, then we don't lose them in the thread later on. One of those, of course, is your book, which we can see in the background. Vivienne, we'll talk about that as much as we can, really, because I know that it's really important to include us on your book tour. And then there's a link from me as well. So obviously I'm writing 2-3 times a week on LinkedIn at the moment with a newsletter. What I say at the moment, hopefully I'll keep it up. Be honored if you would subscribe to that. So welcome those that are jumping in the room. It is open, so let me just pop this in the chat. So this is the link to today's session. So do share that with your network, your colleagues, your family, your friends. If you think they need to hear this conversation, which I think is quite likely, then just tell them to come on over and the room's open, and we'll be very pleased to have their presence. So Vivienne, a huge welcome to you.
It's such a pleasure to be here, however early in the morning it might be for me.
We very much appreciate that. Jason, let's start and let's find out who Dr. Vivienne Ming is. And if you must mention me as well, then I suppose I'll put up with it.
Thank you, Richard. And hello, Vivienne. We'll go for the bio because we are on the hour, isn't it, today? So Dr. Vivienne Ming is a visionary in the fields of AI and neurotechnology, known for her groundbreaking work at the intersection of technology and human potential. As co-founder and executive chair of Socos Labs, Dr. Ming focuses on how AI can be ethically integrated into educational systems to enhance learning and inclusivity. Her research and innovations in neurotechnology are particularly aimed at supporting neurodiverse students, ensuring that educational opportunities are both equitable and inclusive. Dr. Ming's insights into the ethical use of AI in education make her a key voice in the ongoing dialogue about the future of learning. Her latest book, How to Robot-Proof Your Kids, explores how individuals and society can thrive in an automated world. Known for pushing boundaries, Dr. Ming's work offers unique research-backed insights that challenge traditional thinking about AI and education. That's a wonderful introduction. I'm just looking at her work and feeling so good already. And now about Richard Foster-Fletcher, chair of MKAI.org. Richard is an authority on AI ethics, skills, and the future of work. He helps organizations navigate the complexities of AI to support responsible and sustainable implementations. His work focuses on aligning AI with ethical practices, particularly within education and the government, and promoting technological progress does not come at the expense of human values. Richard, do you want me to add the context?
Yeah, in just a moment. I think we might be on the same page then, Vivienne, at least in our aims and intentions in our work. I want to ask you a little bit more about your interesting background as well, which I'm sure you get asked a lot. But yes, Jaisal, let's just frame the context very quickly and then over to Vivienne, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Neurotechnology in this context means using tech to interact with the brain or nervous system to improve learning. For Dr. Vivienne Ming, it isn't about invasive gadgets. It's about using neuroscience, AI, and data to understand how people learn on an individual level. Dr. Ming's work focuses on personalized education, particularly for neurodiverse learners. She uses biometric data like brainwave activity combined with AI models to tailor learning experiences. The goal is to create adaptive environments that adjust in real time, helping each learner effectively. Non-invasive tech such as EEG, headbands, and eye tracking tools plays a key role in this. Ethically, Dr. Ming is focused on ensuring these technologies are used responsibly, protecting privacy and enhancing human potential rather than limiting it. Thank you, Richard.
How did we do? Are we summarizing your life? Well,
I guess we could start with everyone should immediately be skeptical of anyone say they are doing this ethically. Probably are very few people out there in the world using AI or neurotechnology who, regardless of what they are doing, would say, yes, I'm the villain in this story. So
we can name
chat
some
about
villains,
that.
though, can't we?
Well, some of them actually aren't all that shy about disclosing what they want to do, but so we can talk a little bit about that. And I should also say my work in neurotech, my work in education spans way outside of neurotechnology, and my work in neurotechnology spans way outside of education. In fact, two of my current companies, this very fancy box behind me, is a device for treating Alzheimer's. Developed by a former postdoc of mine and her co-founder. In fact, I'll be in Copenhagen in about a week to go visit with them. And my other company is using AI and epigenetics to, for the first time ever, we've created a medical diagnostic for postpartum depression. So if you've ever experienced it, I can say quite literally, it's not just in your head. We can literally see it in your epigenetics. So these are spaces outside of traditional education. So we might generalize it to say, I'm interested in, and again, feel free to push back on this audience, but I'm interested in making better people. And if this is education or health or human development writ large, then I'm genuinely interested.
And just a little bit more on your journey, Vivienne. What got you to here? What were the early years like? You have a quite interesting story, I think.
I do. So let me start in the middle, and then we can go back a little earlier. Professionally, I started here at UC Berkeley, which is where I'm joining you from right at the moment. Nowadays, I'm the chair of the Neurotech Collider Lab here at UC Berkeley. But back then, I was at a place called the Redwood Center for Theoretical Neuroscience. And obviously, it's a bunch of nerds trying to turn math into brains and brains into math. And in fact, my grand advisor, John Hupfield, just won a Nobel Prize. So Terry Sonosky was his advisor. Terry was both my undergraduate honors thesis advisor and the advisor to my PhD advisor. So that was lovely. And yeah, we got a whole slew, our applied AI world got a whole slew of Nobel Prizes this week. And
yes.
So from there, in the interim, I started a bunch of companies, a couple of them in education, a couple using AI in workforce, and of course, nowadays, my neurotechnologies companies in health. But actually what I really love to do, and then we'll jump way back in time, my day job is I run a philanthropic lab. Nowadays it's called the Human Trust. It is formally a legal entity called a data trust and a nonprofit. People bring me challenging problems. And if it's about people, and I think my team and I have something unique to offer, then I'll pay for everything, and whatever we invent, we give away. Furthermore, in that trust context, the legal structure of the nonprofit is any data that comes into it is legally the property of the people who contributed that data. And we couldn't sell it or do anything with it if we wanted to. Our whole legal trust structures is set up to prevent that. So I genuinely felt, and I wrote an FT op-ed about it, that the right to AI acting solely in our self-interest, just as the right to a lawyer or doctor doing the same, should be a constitutionally mandated right. And since I don't believe that's actually going to happen anytime soon, I just put my money where my mouth was and started the data trust. All right, so why do I do all of this stuff? Start a whole bunch of companies with a lot more heart than good business sense. Because when I was little, I was supposed to win a Nobel Prize. And I had this amazing life in coastal California. And boy, when you're 11 and you suddenly realize that despite what everyone has told you, you're not the smartest person on the planet, that does bad things to your head. So I ended up homeless. And I spent a good chunk of the 90s, not my favorite decade. And if any listeners were not yet born by then, screw you. I don't need to be reminded that there are healthy young people in the world that don't have wrinkles. But I spent years wondering where my next meal was coming from. Very self-inflicted. And I needed to find a different way to live my life. And so it was America. So I had a very long night with a gun, trying to figure out why I should be alive. And instead, I thought I could live a life that made other people's lives better, even if I was never happy. That didn't have to be the reason I led my life. And rather amazingly, that slowly, after many years, led me back out of homelessness, back to university, where I had this amazing experience. And I did my whole undergraduate degree in a single year, and I got perfect scores in every course. And I got to go and do some PhDs at Carnegie Mellon, and then end up at Stanford and Berkeley. You know, the fact that I occasionally get to go to the White House and tell them my opinion about things, or visit and chat with NATO or the UN is, don't they realize I used to know the exact price of a box of rice because that would be my meal for the week? You know, if my life has one lesson, it's that it's not about you. And that's been the guide for all of my work.
And those moments of intense examination about yourself or your identity, do you still feel that showing up in your work today?
One of the wonderful tensions of my life and my work is that I believe deeply in my work. But I can't not look back at my life and think, well, I'm rather silly. No one should take me seriously. And yet I take my work very seriously. And I just live with that tension. You know, that dissonance between those two things is a reality. So maybe a healthy reality where I find real value in the things I'm able to offer the world without taking myself terribly seriously. And how could I? I ruined my life. I can't go back in time and change that. So what I can do is move forward in time and do the best I can to make certain that no one else goes through that.
But that experience, I guess, heightened your sense of empathy, perhaps something we lack a lot with our peers.
You know, I'm probably flirting with some of the borders of autism. And my son is like me, but turned up to 11. So he's just in a full-blown world of seeing everything differently. And in fact, if you stick me in an fMRI, a little brain imaging, you'll see that my brain doesn't respond to social signals quite the same way everyone else does. Whether I was born that way or it's a product of spending years never having a social interaction with a meaningful social interaction with another human being. Hard to say, but what it's granted me is the chance to say what I truly believe about the world. I'm starting from zero. So every positive thing I can add is a benefit. It makes my life better. And so I got courage for free by stripping myself of everything I could be afraid of. And trust me, I do not recommend that. I wouldn't wish homelessness on my worst enemy. But it's the one arguably positive thing that came out of it all, is that I get to be very genuine in how I engage with the world.
Yeah, I mean, life does humble us. It finds a way, doesn't it? One way or the other.
Yeah, of course, you can always do the classic, do what I did, have a couple of kids, and then experience their rather transparent scorn for your terrible jokes and your inability to carry a tune. But they're proud of my work. And this is maybe not the point of the discussion, but having started a couple of education companies, and my wife is a professor of education, and I often get asked, Dr. Ming, how can I be a better parent? As though I have the magic ingredient. And I have a piece of advice, which is genuinely 100% true. But I know it's not the advice that everyone is looking for. They're looking for, Dr. Ming, what's the 5 things I can do tomorrow to be a better parent? But my advice is be a better person. Be the person you want your child to be. Because the single biggest impact you will ever have on their lives is what you role model for them. And that is a hard numbers statement. Far more than anything else we do as parents, or just even as visible people in a community, is what we role model. We can say a lot, we can endorse various ideas. How you live your life changes everyone around you. And here's the wonderful thing about that piece of advice. You get to be that person. You get to be the person you want your child to grow up to be. So it's a win-win, even if admittedly it's a hard piece of advice to follow.
So you are a mother and you have a family. To what extent do you feel that you're having to supplement the education system with your children?
Oh, wow. You could say this about health, about education. The reality is, I wish the world was a better place, but you need to be your own advocate. That doesn't mean you scorn. It's one thing. In fact, I was told way back when I was getting, one of my PhDs is in psychology, and they told us, there was we have this little clinic. You're about to graduate, go out into the world to be a professor. Here are the life lessons you need to know. And one of them was, don't look down on your children's teachers. No, they don't have your fancy education from an elite university. But if you constantly tell your kids that they're wrong, then they won't respect their teachers. So our kids go, in the US sense, to the local public schools. We never wanted them to go to a sort of an elite private school. But there's not everything available to them there. A benefit, their parents are way overeducated. And my wife has some pretty fancy credentials herself and is even a professor of education. So, we lean into what are the unique things we can add into our kids' lives that they may not be able to do themselves. So a little thing that I do, for example, is much like you, I have a weekly newsletter. In this case, I read a lot of research. And I just thought it would be fun. I read it for myself. It would be fun and actually help me understand the research itself if I pulled a couple of papers every week and I explained why they were meaningful to me. So what I've done this year with my son, who is 17, is I have him pick the papers. I have literally a backlog of thousands and thousands of articles that I thought was worthwhile enough that someone should share them with the public. And I told him, don't find one or two, find 2 pairs of papers thematically related. What are the 2 most related papers out of these thousands? So he has to read through all of them to some degree. So he gets to see the abstract and my notes and then pick 2 papers that I will then, my challenge is that I have to contextualize them together. rather than independently. So I have to connect them, which is a good exercise for me. Because as we were saying before we started this event, my advisor's advisor, not the one that won a Nobel Prize, but another one, shared this idea that science is a story. And that doesn't mean give a good talk about science or get a Netflix deal for your science show. It means our job is a little bit like Sherlock Holmes. Our clues aren't, there's a tan line where a wedding ring used to be, and you have a certain lilt in your accent that suggests that you spent time somewhere. Our clues are the papers. And the story we're looking for is the story that best explains all of the papers, all of the research studies, not one, all of them, including the ones we disagree with. And you don't get to just say they were wrong. You have to explain why they got the results they got in the context of your story that you're offering. And here's the brutal part. The one thing you know for certain is that your story's wrong. Is the inevitable reality of science. So how do we move progressively towards better and better stories, knowing that no story is ever truly going to be right? And so in that sense, having my son be a part of this discovery of the story of science as it relates to my work is just an example of where we've tried to supplement what they're getting out of the rest of the education system.
I would categorize those things as curiosity and creativity, actually, the way that you were describing. The suggestion that he not only finds something that interests him, but finds counter-arguments, finds balance, questions that. I mean, full disclaimer, Vivienne, I was not reading scientific papers at 17 myself, so I can only imagine how many decades ahead he will be than me.
My son is a little unusual, but there are, as a kid with autism, there are things that the rest of us would think, why is that hard for you? Like he has an anxiety disorder around needles. So getting a blood draw out of him, well, he also has diabetes. Needles are a regular part of his life. And so imagine the paradox that every day he gets jabbed with a needle. In a diabetes context, he doesn't think anything about it. But if you take him in for a flu shot or to get blood drawn, oh, wow. And people have a hard time understanding that. But then you can go, when he was 10, he wrote an essay about the themes of racism that were metaphorically represented unintentionally in the works of H.P. Lovecraft. That was his 10-year-old exit from middle school that he did, you know.
Not sure I can do that now.
He's an amazing kid, and the world needs to find out how to make space for people that have some real value to add, but are different.
Well, I can't help but keep noticing the poster across your right shoulder, I guess it is, you know, you say about that tax, don't you, of being different. I think to some extent that's what you're describing, isn't it?
Yeah, there is. So that's the tax on being different, which is my next book. And then over here, because I think the right way to write your first book is to instead write 3 at the same time plus a screenplay. Clearly, I have done nothing wrong with my life. But these are the 3 books that I sort of had been writing at the same time. And the first one's now finally coming out. And then the next 2 are in a sort of landing pattern coming in after them. But the tax on being different is just a little bit of a memoir because I'm pretty different, but also just looking. I'm a hard number scientist. What does it mean? What are the challenges of being different? As that title comes from an invitation I had to speak to a Republican presidential candidate, not the one that is now currently in your mind. What would be the point? But to speak to one of his previous competitors about some of my research. In this case, my research on being different. And I thought, God, how do I ascribe the value of difference to a well-intentioned conservative whose maybe native stance is difference isn't so great? And I thought, what's the dirtiest word in the conservative language? Well, it's got 3 letters, tax. So I thought I actually have the ability to put in dollars and pounds what it costs to be gay in the UK, to be Black in the United States. And I just thought, why don't we call that the tax on being different? And then I'll write a whole book about that research, applying AI to questions of difference. But the corollary to that is the value. One of the single biggest predictors of the intelligence of a group of people is how diverse they are. And realizing that, for example, there's this phenomenon called the diversity innovation paradox. And it's not just about race and it's not just about gender, but absolutely those are components of this. The people that are outliers within their fields are substantially more likely to come up with truly innovative ideas, disruptive ideas within their fields of science, fields of business and industry. But the paradox is they are less likely to have those ideas taken up, and they are less likely to progress in their careers. And why do we have this tension in society is something that I've had the chance to research and then write about.
Thank you. Let's ask a few questions that lean into what I was suggesting. So my idea was that you were promoting more curiosity and creativity, and that was a sort of loaded question because they are aspects of education that I feel are undernourished. Education perhaps serves the masses potentially in the wrong way, but it certainly doesn't serve those at the edges for lots of reasons. But I am curious. So, we hear such phrases that education systems are struggling to keep pace with the speed of technological change. But from your perspective, is this gap about technology, or is it more about resistance to rethink maybe some of the fundamentals of teaching and learning? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, please, everyone, feel free to ask anything you want to ask, but I can put it this way, and it's one of the themes in the book. Right now, all the world's knowledge is free in your pocket. And that's an interesting state of affairs, particularly in the context of education, because for most of the modern world, the education system, which I would never describe as fundamentally broken, it built the modern world. It's an amazing thing for all of its flaws. But right now, we're still being taught all the way up through our PhDs to memorize a bunch of facts about the world, to execute a bunch of highly routine algorithms. Well, that is exactly what this thing is superhumanly good at. What a crazy thing to build humans to compete directly against the very technology we've invented that's better at that than humans are. So what can't GPT do? What can't diffusion models create? Well, if we think of AI as fundamentally the space of it produces the answer to well-posed questions for which there are right and wrong answers. And I say that because that's how I train models. It's how all of us train models. We give it a series of examples of the thing it's learning, such as, here's a sentence, predict the next word. And there's a right answer to that question. But essentially, I just described to you the fundamental realities of GPT, Gemini, Claude. Here are a set of pixels. Predict the next pixel, diffusing outward. Well, those are the diffusion models like DALL-E. So AI is fundamentally about well-posed questions. Humanity's unique advantage is about ill-posed questions that don't have right or wrong answers. In fact, questions that we have not yet discovered. So our unique advantage is exploring the unknown. And I'm not saying the education system in the US, the UK, let's be blunt, everywhere in the third world has no elements of that, but it is simply not the focal point of those systems. We are still being taught how to answer well-posed questions. A skill which is not terrible to have when those questions become nuanced and esoteric, but still, GPT, Gemini, any of these can pass every bar exam in every state of the United States at 99.97% lower cost than the average US lawyer. That memorizing the answers to well-posed questions is a failure if that continues to be the way our education systems work. So instead, we need, exactly as you say, what is a curriculum around curiosity? What is a curriculum around motivation? To build into kids the belief that their hard work will pay off, what we call subjective utility. But not just that, resilience, perspective taking. How do we build social skills into people? Creativity-related skills like analogical reasoning or lateral thinking. And fundamental is sometimes these are called non-cognitive, and yet working memory span, numeracy, literacy, these are highly predictive of long-term life outcomes. They almost certainly have been throughout all of human history. I mean, maybe not literacy in some sense, but these are the factors that actually predict life outcomes. Not whether you can factorize a polynomial, not whether you got a degree from Cambridge. Once I knew these other things about you, they explain why you got to go to Stanford. They explain much of why it is you know how to factorize a polynomial. So these, I'm going to offer this metaphor and then hopefully we can toss it out to some questions. But the way, my little story then, I guess, is we have artists and their tools. And classic maths is a tool. And AI is a tool. And knowing what the Treaty of Westphalia was a tool. These are all these well-posed skills and tools that we have. The artist is what you do with those tools. Finding the right questions to ask. Understanding why no one is asking questions in a space totally different than what everyone's talking about. When I run an analysis, as I had a chance to do at one of my companies across 122 million people, it's those artist qualities, not the tools, that predicts both career outcomes and long-term life outcomes, ranging from all-cause mortality and morbidity, central body mass, insulin sensitivity, to how many friends you have when you're 65, walking speed at age 65, and yes, wealth and income. And yet, school is not only almost entirely focused on the tools. School and hiring largely treat students as though they were tools. You're just a list of skills on a resume. Our labor policy is, do we have enough people with this list of skills that supposedly our economy needs? Yes. When we should instead be really focusing on the artists and let them go grow up to solve the problems that they think are interesting.
Yeah, so I'll jump in a second. I sure would love to put this out to questions. I haven't seen much yet, but the chat does seem to be coming to life now, which is great. Just pop your camera on as well. Give me a wave if you want to speak to Vivienne directly. So I love what you said, and I basically agree with what you said as well. And I think it's a fundamental and one of the most exciting and challenging areas of education that we could ever have, and has been for some time. I question whether that's really got a lot to do with so-called AI that we have at the moment, which, and you called it out on this. I mean, it's fundamentally a lot of decision trees. I've been posting a little bit out recently that 3.5 ChatGPT was just this messy, crazy, hallucinating nonsense, and then suddenly 4.0 is all a bit more logical. So that took a lot of human intervention then, didn't it? But at the same time, we've had the world's information in our pocket, like you say, for over a decade and a half. And now there's this phrase, isn't it, that we have the guide now to do that. So I do pride myself on being a curious, creative individual, and I think I built my career on that. But now, when I'm using ChatGPT, which is our current instance of generative AI, I find myself trying to unlock the world's data and the world's secrets in there through well-posed questions. For example, if you want to get a LinkedIn post and you just get it to write one of those, it's rubbish. Because for two reasons. One, the data tends to be, I think, quite poor for social media posts. And two is that I definitely personally don't have the keys. I don't know how to program ChatGPT to get a really good social media post. I feel, I can do it for posts, I can do it for emails, I can do it for presentations. I can't do it for social media posts. And so without having a North Star, I can't get there. And it frustrates me when I feel like I've got the wrong key to the lock. Does that make sense to Vivienne?
It very much does. And let me offer maybe a couple of examples. So obviously in my work, going back to the first models I built back in 1999, back then, if I'm talking about AI, this is code that I wrote, it's math that I programmed into a computer program. Now you genuinely have the ability to, on some level, have this conversation with a chatbot and have it do some of the very things that used to require this very refined understanding of how machine learning worked and both the math and the engineering behind it. So the emergence of these large language models has been very empowering, and their transition into large multimodal models. I was having a conversation with Gemini the other day. I insanely just bought a house in Berkeley, which anyone trying to buy a house in California, New York, London, you get what a nonsense experience that is. But having done that, I actually ended up, this is what's beautiful about what are now large multimodal models, is I threw it in a picture of it along with saying, hey, this is the new house I built, and I'm thinking about different fronts for the house. It's a little plain. And imagine we were doing this with more of a Mediterranean villa style. Give me a look at what that would look like. So this may seem silly, but one of my favorite fictional examples of interacting with AI that I thought really touches on some of my modern interactions with AI are the scenes of Tony Stark in the Marvel movies interacting with Jarvis, where there's the scene, for example, where he sort of discovers time travel and he's just throwing ideas at it. We'll try it like this. Actually, let's turn it around. And you know what it felt like watching that, and also my experiences working with AI. I admit this isn't going to translate for everyone, but I hope at least you get a sense of what I mean. It's like when I interact with my grad students. The project that they are working on, they are the world expert, which is to say they know everything about it. 24/7, this is their life. For the next 5 to 7 years, they will live and breathe this research question, and they will end up knowing it better than anyone else. So why am I there an hour a week offering up to the world leading expert on this question? Because my grad students know everything about that question, but they understand nothing. And my job as their advisor is to impart initially to give them that understanding, but then slowly over time, bring that out of them, train that understanding so they can bring it themselves. The facts, knowing something about the brain or the mathematics of machine learning, that is not what makes you a great scientist. It's the understanding that does, which also is what makes you a great lawyer. It's not knowing all the legal facts or all of the diagnostic facts as a doctor. It's what you do with those tools. So for me, when I interact with Gemini, which I have a long collaborative history with Google, so for whatever reason I work there. Also, a lot of my current work is in medical stuff, and MedGemini is really strong, is I treat it like my grad student, which is to say, I never assume it understands what I just said. It might have a misunderstanding. I never take what it says as truth. I push back hard. I dig into where I suspect there are misunderstandings. So let me give two very concrete examples of a use case. One is super nerdy. I had a question, a very esoteric one. Even if you were a statistician, this is a little unusual, but it's fully derivable. What is the confidence interval of the product of two regression model parameters? So I asked this of GPT at the time, and it gave me the wrong answer. Fortunately, even though I didn't know the right answer, I understood the problem and I knew its answer was wrong. It was telling me the confidence interval, the product of two random variables. Useful, but not what I need, because I already know it for one thing. So I said, no, you've misunderstood the question. Like a graduate student, I walked it through. I walked it to simpler versions of the problem and then sort of orchestrated bringing it together. And we ended up with both the LaTeX code for writing that equation that I did not know myself and the Python code for executing it on my data. It couldn't do it on its own. I couldn't do it on my own. Maybe I could have taken some time to derive this by hand. Maybe I could have gone and asked some friends in the stats department, but it only took about a half an hour. And we produced something better than either of us could have alone. It supplied the knowledge, I supplied the understanding. And in that context, and coming back to your comment about LinkedIn posts, in a world where all the world's knowledge is free in your pocket, your value is not your ability to supply the exact same answer that any other expert in the domain would have supplied, because very likely that answer is already here. Your job, your value to the world is your unique voice. What do you have to say about this problem that is different from anyone else in the world? That's something students should be trained to explore, to interrogate themselves. So here's how I use it for the equivalent of LinkedIn posts. I'm writing my books. Never in a million years would I let Claude, GPT, Gemini write anything for me. It's such a trite writer. And it writes, I'm going to call it one standard deviation above the average of the internet. And I'm arrogant enough to say that's not good enough for me. And also its sense of humor is terrible. So it throws in none of the sci-fi references I want. It does none of the dumb, gross out humor that I want in here, nor none of the intellectual humor I want in it. It also doesn't understand the fine details of the problems I'm talking about. So instead, I do the thing I hate. I hate writing. I hate writing code. I hate writing words. I like having had written. But I go through the hard work and I write a chapter of my new book. Then I feed that into Gemini and I say, Gemini, you are now my worst enemy. You are my nemesis that has been dogging me for my entire career, finding every mistake I make and explaining it to the public. Here's the chapter of my new book. Find every place where I'm wrong and explain to me in detail what I've gotten wrong and how I can fix it. But then here's one of the cool things. Unlike my grad students that are expert in one thing, these LLMs are notionally, imperfectly expert in everything. So then I can say to the exact same model, you are now my next bored audience that couldn't care less what I'm talking about and don't see why it's relevant to them. Find all the points in this new chapter where I've lost you and where you have become disinterested in what I'm talking about, and explain to me why I'm not making this relevant to you. I don't use AI to make my life easier. I use it to make it harder, but I use it to make it harder in productive ways. What in my research I call productive friction. I want to use AI to make us better people. I actually am almost completely disinterested in using AI to automate things. When Uber spoke to me about being their chief scientist to build self-driving cars, I can say honestly, you cannot pay me $10 million to be alone in a room with their CEO, Travis Kalanick, former CEO. But also I'm just not interested in self-driving. I want to build better drivers. I don't want to build self-driving cars. There are places where automation makes total sense, not in my work. My work is about people. How do we make better people? Better students, better employees, better parents. And for me, that is fundamentally a question not of what AI can do for you or neurotechnologies, but what can you do for yourselves and how can AI make you better in that regard?
The second rule of being a great interviewer is to ask good questions. The first rule is to know when to shut up the hell up and just listen. Vivienne, that was amazing. That was stunning.
Thank you.
That is just amazing. Thank you so much for that. I was hanging on your every word. I do have a question, because I won't ask it, but I'll just prompt it, is that we are hearing about these new reasoning models though, and I'd just love to get an opinion, if you have one, on things like O1 and whether that genuinely is changing what you're describing. But other people have questions, so maybe there'll be time for that, maybe not. Let's go to the chat, Jaisla, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, there are a couple of questions in the chat, and I'll go through those. We'll see how the time goes, and I can ask more. So Nicola Strong has asked a question. I'm in the process of launching research that is adding AI data to the Global South. Do you have any thoughts or insights on the diversity of different cultures and philosophies of thought in relation to AI?
So there's some practical considerations in the context of this question. I know that there are a number of very local communities, such as groups in the Oaxaca region of Mexico, that are very intentionally using the legal system to keep, even though they are these sort of long tail of languages. So they're doing their best to keep their language out of the data sets being used, because they don't want Sam Altman selling their cultural heritage via GPT. So it's interesting to note that this is sort of a two-sided question. One is, what is all the richness of perspective and cultural heritage that could be and should be incorporated into this global resource? And the other is, what are our sort of regional rights in preserving that identity independent from everyone else and having some ownership of that? And I don't have magic answers for these sorts of things. I'm a bit of a sharer. So my philosophy of being a multiculturalist and a pluralist is, we are all collectively better because of the sparks that come from the moments that those cultures touch one another. And that's part of what makes dense urban cores like the heart of London or Manhattan so exciting, is because so many different kinds of people are coming together just as part of your daily life. That's exciting. And it has been throughout a lot of history. You look at villages that were closer to spice routes. So you can look, I mean, literally thousands of years ago, and you look at villages that were closer to the spice trade routes and ones that were farther away. And that simple distance metric says all sorts of things about their beliefs, about morality and ethics and strangers. It's a fascinating field of research. Really is interesting. So there clearly are missing things. If you're having a conversation with GPT right now, the United States is wildly overrepresented, not like explicitly or intentionally. It's just right now the Western canon and US social media is just a dominant data set. And one of the realities of machine learning is they're giant statistical learning engines. Here's a small aside. And it's a little bit an answer to the question about reasoning, but we can hold off on that further. Is modern AI truly intelligent? Yes, it is. We have something called model-free learning or statistical learning that we engage in all the time. One of the reasons GPT, Gemini, Claude seem so intelligent is they are superhuman in that very form of intelligence. So much of our own language and our actions are purely based on the statistics and regularities of the world. And that's what these systems are fundamentally about. What's different is we have a variety of other forms of intelligence that are currently not well represented in these systems. And one of the realities of statistical intelligence is it reflects where the mass of the data is. And right now, the mass of the training data for these systems is this sort of primarily English, primarily sort of Western US sort of broad. You might think of it as the result of the British Empire is sort of really well centered in the heart of these modern LLMs. Not because they're the only things there, or because anyone intended them to be this way. It's just the reality of training models. And so a lot of work has gone actually then into what's called human in the loop training, where you bring in groups and they try and both improve the performance of the models, but also diversify its sort of represented knowledge base. Plus, you can also prompt these to kind of, let's call it steer them into more subsidiary identities. Having said all of that, and still feeling like I haven't adequately answered the question, here's a profound limitation. If you train an LLM on an LLM, it undergoes what's called model collapse. Very quickly, it becomes gibberish. Well, if LLMs were truly representative of all of us, all of the data they've been trained on, if they were statistically isomorphic, to be a nerd about it, then that shouldn't happen. An LLM trained on us becomes this amazing thing. An LLM trained on itself collapses. So clearly, it is not us. It hasn't captured all that nuance. And one of the things for me that's missing is the long tail. All of us are meaningfully unique in a way that is medically meaningful, effectively unique. Within the grand scope, there's something about, let's say, not just our genome, but our epigenome, which makes us, at this one instance in history, a unique person in a way that is genuinely meaningful. Like, your doctor ought to know about this. So all of us exist somewhere on the long tail. But AI and LLMs in particular are all about the mass of the data. So if I took samples from real people, I'm always getting these long tails of unique human experience. If I take samples from an LLM, I'm always getting the mass of the data. A huge advance for AI research would be able to create big, diverse models that can more accurately represent how meaningfully different each of us is. We might, in fact, to take a term from machine learning itself, that we're a mixture of experts, that it represents the heterogeneity of the human experience. That's why I think it would be so valuable to better represent all of this cultural variability, all of this ethical difference, is because we need to capture it. It's actually what makes us special. And I'm saying this both as a hard number scientist, but also philosophically. And right now it's not getting well captured. But unfortunately, this requires both an advance on the machine learning side of AI, and while also a more inclusive advance in what data is being pulled in, how it's getting represented, the sort of cultural and moral perspectives of different groups are getting represented. Both of them are incredibly challenging questions. But the whole point is we should take up the challenge.
Thanks so much. There are a couple of more questions, so I'll be posing one or two of them. So there's one question, it comes from Fenula. Question for Dr. Ming: the main way humans have learned from each other across the ages is apprenticeship. In an increasingly virtual world, how do you learn by mimicking and getting immediate specific guidance?
Here is an interesting, I like paradoxes. So some of my work has been based around that. Here's one that we came across recently: the information exploration paradox. It seems like we live in this amazing world for learning. So much information is available, particularly because of the internet, and now with LLMs. Here's the paradox: not just in everyday life, let's say popular music or book choices, but in prediction markets of expert analysts, economic analysts, in scientists. We actually see that as the rate of information passes a certain threshold and continues to increase literally exponentially, humans explore less. Not relatively less in absolute terms. If there's 100 papers published a month and I get to read 20 of them, if there's 1,000 papers a month, I don't read 40, so less relative, I read 10. That when I came across that finding in our data, I was shocked. It was one of the most shocking things I've ever discovered. As information rates increase, humans explore less. Our tendency is to then, instead of exploring, to just look over at our neighbors and do whatever they do. And so existing ideas become more strongly cited in science. It's harder for new people to break into fields. And when they do, the correlation between the quality of their work and their chance of success goes down. So people just kind of picked at random. So there's a ton more to be said about this. And if you're interested, there is more about it in my upcoming books. But what does that mean, both in the context of AI, but also in the context of human experience for learning? What's amazing about mentorship models is you are truly learning from an individual, and their perspective, just as yours, is relatively unique. You're preserving this long tail of human experience rather than if everyone asks GPT the same question, they get the same answer, roughly speaking. And so we all learn exactly the same thing. If you do that instead, if 1 billion people ask 1 million experts, they get 1 million different answers. But the problem is, slowly over time, as the internet has come into being and now AI has come into being to help answer questions, those 1 million experts, their answers are getting more and more similar. And that really terrifies me. So interesting enough, if we really want to share mentorship out with everyone, and we should, it's a proven successful model, but a hard one just because the people that need it the most have the least access to the best mentors. The most elite mentors are going to want to mentor the most elite students, but they need the least help. That's a paradox that is also there and is hard to overcome in societies. But how can we think about what do I uniquely have to offer my student? Not what's the safe answer that they would hear from any other mentor. What's the answer they will only hear from me? And in fact, you can tell they love me on radio. I have nothing, I've never found a 30-second answer that I couldn't turn into a good 30-minute screed. But I'll close with this. I have one job interview question. If you want to be in my academic lab or at my companies, I have one question. Pitch me a mad science project. And I don't care if you write it up or if you have slides. I don't even care if you know how to do the thing you're pitching to me. That's not the actual interview. The interview is we then spend an hour together trying to figure out how to make it work. I don't poke holes in it. That's not the point. I'm a fairly clever person. I can find the flaws. My job and yours together is to try to figure out how to make it work. Then I ask myself a question. Did we have a better idea together than I would have had by myself? And if I think we're better together, that is the most magical thing in the entire world. I cannot teach you to have ideas I wouldn't have had. So if we're better together, then you got the job. And that's kind of that spirit. Now I'm notionally the mentor, but I'm actually picking my students based on who I think makes me better or us together. And it doesn't mean if we're not better together, it doesn't mean that that potential student or employee is a bad employee. It just means something about us together is not producing that spark that everyone should be looking for. And then finding that matching, that complementary diversity where we're each bringing something different, but we're clicking. That is, in fact, I'll be nerdy here. I'm working on an AI that we call the matchmaker, looking at this inside big communities like companies and universities to find not who do you know, as in LinkedIn, who should you know, and create those sparks. Literally, our numerical, our cost function we're trying to optimize is the collective intelligence of that community.
I think we can take one question from LinkedIn Live, and we just have 2 minutes on the clock, and then we go for the after party. How do you take
Perfect.
care of ethical digressions or errors by students to be addressed?
Oh my goodness. So let's start with this one. There are very few villains in the world. Unfortunately, that there are not zero, but there are very few people that truly relish inflicting cruelty on one another. Most of what I have come across, and I've lived a pretty strange life and had some bad things happen, and I've probably been the author of some bad things. Most of the story, let's say, of bias is not about villainy. It's about us being human. And if we can just accept that we are profoundly imperfect, and in that imperfection, we both have something to offer the world, but also have limitations and weaknesses, then all we're acknowledging is that occasionally we do something wrong, but we're open to learning from that. And that's all I'm really looking for people. No, I went through gender transition. There are maybe the majority of the world doesn't get it and has some fairly strong beliefs about that. That's fine. I am perfectly okay with what anyone else wants to see about me, as long as they offer me some basic human dignity. And I am happy to do the same back with them. The world is better if I don't get to decide for everyone else what they believe, as long as we make space for one another. So in that context, then when I think about my students or my kids or myself making mistakes, even bad mistakes, here's my piece of advice. A lot of this is about courage. Ethical AI, for example, I get invited to give lots of talks about it and talk with the UN about it and things. There isn't some magic. If we just had enough people with long white beards telling us the truth of the universe, we'd solve all these problems. That's absolute nonsense. If we had a checklist, if we had these principles published, no. Fundamentally, it's about understanding how to solve hard problems, and two, recognizing what you truly want in the moment when it begins to diverge from what the world truly needs. And those moments are hard. Again, I don't think that there are a whole lot of true villains in this world that are intentionally doing the wrong thing. Most of the time, people get caught up in the moment and they believe that what they're doing feels right, but they've got $1 billion on the line. Can you imagine the moment I could do the right thing or I could be a billionaire? And I will say this, if you have not practiced courage, if you aren't making tough choices when it's easy, I guarantee you, you will not be the person you imagine you are when it's hard. And I think that's maybe, I know this was not a 2-minute answer, but that idea is really clear. We're all very different. Some people bring a lot more of what we might think of as courage to the table by default than others. But again and again, and I have some research to back this up, but I know we don't have time for it. I see people make statements about what they believe is true about the world. And then they enter the real world and they're forced to make tough choices and they do the very thing they themselves said was wrong. And ultimately, in the end, it was because they saw themselves as just a fixedly good person that would always do the right thing, rather than practicing courage as though it's a hard, effortful task, so that it's easy when the world really needs you to do it. And again, I'll skip running through the numbers and the experiments, but that is the big issue for me. Practice courage, and you have a better chance of being who you wish you were.
Vivienne, you're stunning, absolutely stunning. I'm out of breath. We're just listening to you for the last hour. It's been a huge honor to be in your presence and to lead some of the questions.
I'm flattered. I truly appreciate that. And let me just add a note. it turns out last week's newsletter from me spoke about AI and rationality. So if you want to read that, it will answer that question you were throwing at me.
Amazing. So I encourage people to click on that link that's been shared a few times here. You're getting access to a lot more than just the book, aren't you, Vivienne, with that? Do you want people to follow you anywhere particularly? Any social media or?
I loathe social media with a passion that dims the sun, and yet I run a philanthropic lab where I invite people to ask for help. So I'm there anyways. I just don't have a lot of conversations there. You can find me on LinkedIn. Please feel free. I'm trying to build up a little following on, what's this new one? Blue Sky, rather than Twitter. So you can find me on Blue Sky as well. And other than that, yeah, feel free to sign up for the newsletter. Technically, the newsletter is free, but right now, if you sign up for a full year on the paid version, which is basically a voluntary donation, you'll get a free copy of How to Robot Proof Your Kids when it comes out next year.
Brilliant. Fantastic. I hope we can stay in touch, and it would be incredible to speak to you again sometime. And for now, we'll say have an amazing day ahead. Have a great Friday. And
cheers.
See you soon.